Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today to the session Careers in Pharma. My name is Kamini Reddy. I'm a second-year master's student in the Department of Epidemiology and pursuing my concentration in clinical trials and evidence synthesis. So without further delay, let's get started as we have a lot to cover on today. I'm very happy and delighted to welcome our three Hopkins alums. I'll let them introduce themselves, but to give a little bit of their background, we have today Dr. Hugo Chun, who has been working at Pfizer for nearly 3 years and is a senior principal scientist for the Vaccines Research and Development Department. We have Marcy English, who has worked with Astellas Pharma since 2015 and is currently the executive director and the global development project leader. We also have Joanna Chan today joining us, who is a senior assistant general counsel and head of the state legal affairs at Pharma. So let us get started then. Could each of you please tell us a little bit more about your professional and education background, what you currently work at, and what you studied at Hopkins? Hugo, do you want to start on?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks all for coming. My name is Hugo Chun. I was at School of Public Health until 2018. I got my PhD at the MMI department. I did a brief postdoc after that, doing some vaccine evaluations in preclinical models of malaria. Then I joined Pfizer in 2019 as part of the early bioprocess development group. At that time, I thought I had a quiet job, and then it very quickly turned not quiet. And so I got folded into the RNA vaccine development group, which I currently lead as part of the upstream drug substance team. Happy to be here. I do understand, I think there's quite a bit to work in pharma that's probably not quite clear to the public health audience. So I'm happy to provide my input.
Thank you, Hugo. Marcy, you're next on my screen. Do you want to go over?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Marcy English. As noted previously in the introductions, I'm an executive director within M&D, medical and development at Astellas Pharma, which is a Japanese pharmaceutical company. I worked in pharma, biotech, consulting, and academia across my 25 plus years of experience in working in science and drug development. I started off I have a very unusual career trajectory. I started off as a molecular biologist in the molecular toxicology department. I know, not clinical, yay. Working at a company called GD Searle, which then became which then became Pfizer. And I did that for 7 years. I did bench research and then decided I wanted to get closer to patients and get closer to that, the clinical trial space, and moved over into clinical research, joined a biotech company where I became director of clinical research and brought a compound to phase 3 and advisory committee meeting. That was an antibiotic, but learned a lot about just drug development in general in a biotech setting, just because you have to wear a lot of hats, especially in smaller companies. I then went into consulting, but I should back up. I actually came to Hopkins. I started at the School of Public Health while I was in biotech. I came back as a part-time student and was really interested in study design and biostatistics and the exploration of data. So I focused on epidemiology and biostatistics while at Hopkins. And that served me very well. I ended up going into consulting after biotech. And I worked for a small firm that was focused on health economics and outcomes research. And we're working to support pharma as well as hospital systems in understanding their data and thinking about market access and valuation. I really didn't care for consulting because I wanted to be closer to projects. So I ended up joining Astellas as Global Director of Health Economics, and then eventually was in the role that I'm in now, which is basically leading an asset all the way through from non-clinical to approvals.
Thank you, Marcy. We'll definitely touch base on some of those areas you worked at later on. Joanna, do you want to start out with your story. It did seem really interesting to me for someone with a law degree to pursue a career in public health. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Joanne Chan, and I currently work at an organization called the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, also known as PhRMA. So before I begin, Hugo, thank you very much for the work of your company and your group on everything that they did. I personally super appreciate it. So thank you for that and all of the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into that. So I am currently a senior assistant general counsel and the head of state legal affairs at PhRMA. So what that means, my organization represents the leading drug research and manufacturing companies in the US. So that would be approximately slightly more than 30 companies, including Astellas and Pfizer. Many of the names probably that you have heard of in our membership. So what we do is we represent the interests of the industry before different governmental bodies. That would be in the state level, which is where I focus, federally, so in front of Congress, agencies, the White House, and then internationally as well. And so essentially what I do in my current role is I advise our state advocacy group on anything that is legally touching, or really if there's a legal issue involving it. So that could be legislation that's introduced in state legislatures that could impact the industry. It could be things that governors or departments of health are doing. I meet with secretaries of health, sometimes insurance commissioners, sometimes attorneys general or governor staff on different issues and explaining to them how the industry works and how legally that may interact with, for example, federal regulations. And also we advise on other sort of issues that would arise in the states touching the industry. And also we litigate if there is a law that we believe is unconstitutional, we will sue a state on that as well. So my pathway to PhRMA. So I, before law school, had studied health policy related issues. My focus was on counter bioterrorism research. But prior to that, I had done research at NIH, genetic research relating to taste blindness. But I had kind of that sort of science background, not super hard science or a degree in that, but related and tangential. So when I went to law school, I had actually gone, I wanted to be a neonatologist when I was a senior in college. I did not want to be a lawyer, but at the, we'll just say, advice of my parents. I went to law school, and so I figured that if I was going to do that, I wanted to stay medicine adjacent, and that was why I pursued a joint public health degree at Hopkins. So I took a year off after my first year of law school, and was actually, I pursued my MPH from 2006 to 2007. So after that, I returned to law school, finished my law degree, and I went to a law firm working on FDA regulatory issues. So I was advising medical device, pharmaceutical, and cosmetic companies on issues relating to HHS and FDA requirements. And then from there, I went in-house to a biotech company. And Marcia, you touched on this. When you go into a company, depending on the size, sometimes you have to do everything. So I was a regulatory and compliance attorney there. And because it was not a huge legal department, had to touch on most parts of the business there. So that included research, commercial, marketing, some of the corporate kind of things. Learned a lot there. And then from there, went to PhRMA, where now I focus on the state issues.
That's great. Thank you, Joanna. So clearly we have like a rich panel today working in all different sectors. I was wondering if you could also get into, talk a little bit more about these sectors and when usually is the right time in a student's career that they should start applying if they want to get into these areas, and how do they stay up to date in terms of getting opportunities particularly in your sector. Like, for example, you go in Pfizer, how do students stay up to date or any opportunities that they may come across, and what would let them get through that initial screening stage and maybe get to an interview? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, excellent question, especially the tail end. Like the key to get past the HR screen is to have a network. I know that when I was on the audience's side and I was listening to these, I found that to be a wildly unappealing answer. but that is the case. Like, you need to build your network. You need to know people in different places. I think, especially as a bench scientist, I understand that it's challenging. Like, we're introverts by nature, but I would say, like, it's for a bench scientist in particular, like, see it as another skill to learn. If you know how to do, I don't know, a PCR, there's a protocol to follow. It's the same with networking. I think having been on the hiring side for a couple of years, like, you do get lost in the crowd. And so if you do have someone who can advocate for you, that is very helpful. And it does weigh quite a bit, because in some sense, like, if you have someone advocating for you, that's a built-in letter of reference.
Right.
And if it is someone that, like, certainly I've gotten references from people that I've worked with, and so I know the quality of their work. That helps quite a bit. So I would say, like, if you are a student at the moment, yes, you should be working on the skills that you have now, the technical skills, if you're a bench scientist. But in the same vein, commit a good amount of time to start building your networks, reach out to people, to get informational interviews, go to panels like these, continue to keep your current networks, because what you'll find is that people will get to different companies, and then you'll be able to pick their brains, and then continue to leverage that for yourself. So I would say, like, that that's something that I wish I had known when I was a grad student. Like, I had put in something like 120 cold applications with a 10% success rate on interviews, which was initially demoralizing, but that's when I realized that the network is where you get a much higher return on investment. So that'd be my biggest piece of advice.
Okay, thank you. We'll discuss about those skill sets in a bit. But Marcy, do you have anything to add? You mentioned about some consultancies that you joined. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I certainly can. So, I think just building on what Hugo said, when you're applying directly to pharma, one of the things that I didn't understand, and it's probably different for consulting, because I'll talk a little bit about how I got into that. But to his point, actually, I got into consulting because of my network. Mm-hmm. So it was somebody I knew who connected me after my biotech company experience, and was like, hey, you know how to work with data, right? And I will tell you exactly how this happened. It was somebody who was like, I go to this health club, and there's a woman I know in my class who's a PharmD, and we were talking, and she works for this consulting firm. I mean, don't, when you think about this whole idea of, like, building your network, it's not about going out and just trying to make friends with, like, a bunch of people in pharma. Mm-hmm. It's kind of about declaring who you are. You're a scientist, and you're looking for opportunities, and making sure that a lot of people are aware of that. Maybe it's your aunt and uncle, like, who knows, like, it could be anybody. That's your network, right? So you're going to use kind of like a little bit of pharma speak, you're going to build your brand. You're going to build your personal brand, and that's super important. I would say that one of the things I didn't understand when I first was trying to get into pharma was the HR algorithms and the power of headhunters, or these consulting firms, or people recruiters that are going to go out and rep. If you submit your resume through a portal on a website for a pharma company, it's going to be screened by a computer algorithm. And it's going to scan your resume, and it's going to be like, does it match up with the keywords for the job description you're applying for? And if it doesn't, you're out. What I also didn't understand, but if you have an internal person present that, it's easier. What I also didn't understand is that if you apply through a cold portal and then you work with a recruiter, that recruiter can't represent you sometimes for like 2 years for jobs for that company. So it's a little bit tricky sometimes how you get in to pharma, or how you get in. The third thing I would say is that, you really need to make contacts with a few people in pharma who can help you understand what the job descriptions really mean. Because the job descriptions are written in pharma speak. And it's kind of a language that, unless you're in the industry, You don't understand. I'll give you an example. I applied for several jobs at Astellas like 5 years before I ever joined. And now I look back and I think to myself, I had no idea what that job entailed. I didn't understand the levels. I didn't understand the lingo. So get somebody who can help you understand the job descriptions. And that could be a professor or somebody you know who has connections within pharma. So those are kind of the things I would add.
Okay. Thank you, Marcy. And Joanna, is it the same, because I believe your work is more into regulatory sector. So is it the same, like building network helps in getting into regulatory or say pharma where you work at? Does that help? Because I understand that the job description, like Marcy suggested, would be a little bit different than into pure industry sector. So how does that work there?
It's a great question. So when it comes to the regulatory or the legal roles, networks always matter, I think, in applying a job, whether in the industry or elsewhere, right? You always want to learn about it. And if you know somebody who can tell you about it and guide you, that's always something that's helpful, right? In terms of the regulatory and legal jobs, it's slightly different in that, speaking to legal jobs, usually companies are looking to hire people who have practiced already for a while, because the way that the legal departments work, often you are being called based on your current expertise to make calls to keep the business running, right? And so a lot of times they will look for people who've either been at agencies like FDA, or if you've been at a law firm, for example, practicing for a couple of years. And that's just so that you have kind of a knowledge base to pull from. The job that I got at the biotech company, I'd actually applied to just off of a job board, actually. But I was at a law firm. And so, I had that experience that I could point to, but it was really just one of the ones that I found online and was like, oh, this looks kind of cool. Let me try. And somehow it worked out. I'm not saying that always works out. It is possible, but it is definitely a path of less resistance if you have somebody who's guiding you through that process.
Right. Thank you. And there's one question in the chat which asks, like, what do you mean by building a network? You just say, like, pop in and say hi to them, or do you just connect on LinkedIn? And how do you basically introduce yourself? Basically, how do you get in touch with that person? Can any one of you just comment on that?
So I'm going to comment on that by also commenting also on what Marcy had said. Like, so I think to me, what I find to be super helpful, like, it's not, yes, you should do things like find people in positions that you think are interested, contact them and say, hey, can we have a quick chat? Like, what's your job like? How does someone get into your field? These things. But I think the thing that I find the most satisfying is to leverage my own interest and my own growth, and then kind of leverage that into a networking thing. And I know that's a lot of, a certain kind of speak, but specifically speaking. So during my postdoc, because I was curious, I wanted to expand my technical skill set. And so I asked my boss, can I do this training with GE? And then he said, of course. And it was great. He was a great mentor. And so I did the training with GE. And so that meant I got to go to a place in the Inner Harbor, that building that looks like it's got a sail on it. Apparently it's a science place. And so I did my training there, and I worked with people from Pfizer. And so they became my network. I demonstrated that I was a pretty good biochemist to them. And they said, hey, if you are looking for a job at Pfizer, make sure you hit me up, and then I can see what I can do for you. So that was to me, that's an opportunity where, like, I use my own personal scientific growth to build my network. And so I think that's to me, like, that's the thing that was most satisfying to me. Like, and it speaks to, I think, Marcy's point, like, communicate to people outside of your current network that you are a good and competent and interested scientist. And those opportunities, those networks and those opportunities those kinds of conversations will happen.
Right. Right. That's a great point. Thank you, Hugo. And I believe sometimes this issue that I've been faced with, especially international students, myself being an international student here at Hopkins, is that sometimes the big pharma companies, they don't really go for international people because they have the visa issue and all that. So what would your advice be to those who are international here and want to get into pharma industry? Should they look into maybe CROs or startups? Like, would that be a get into the pharma sector later on? I mean, any one of you could really comment on that.
I'd say yes. Yes.
Okay.
And I think there's a level of, if you're just starting out they're coming right out of school. And again, some of it's going to come down to your network. Some of it's going to come down to what that company's policies are about doing that. And so trying to find out, like, are they even going to support this aspect? I have found that a lot of biotech companies are much more agreeable to doing that than, say, the mid-sized to larger pharma, just because mid-sized to larger pharma, sometimes they have a bigger pool of applicants, whereas a biotech company might have a really bespoke need. You know, I would say, just generally speaking overall, I would not trade my experience working in biotech for anything, because to Joanne's point, like, you learn so much about how the industry works. And there are parts of it that are very similar to academia. It's like a little bit, I want to say freer, but there's that sense of you can explore a lot of different interests without feeling like you're going out of your job description. And I think that's incredibly beneficial.
And that's a good suggestion, looking into biotech companies. Joanna, do you have anything to add here? Because I believe that getting especially into regulatory agencies is a big problem for international students, because it does state that you need to have some days of stay in the US if you even want to apply. Do you think there are any other pathways that students could explore?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think probably you can, if you are interested in the regulatory role, looking at the private sector and kind of seeing, you know, what Marcia was talking about in terms of the companies that are maybe more willing to look at that. But I think that you can still do regulatory, you know, careers, just maybe see that different pathways in.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to discuss a little bit more about the skill sets that you all have mentioned about. So as a student, like in your student life, if we want to get into pharma industry, what would you advise to develop, which skills to develop, which technical or soft skills to develop, what classes? Like Marcy, I know you mentioned about you taking epi and biostats, and you talked about that work you did in Baltimore. So what is your general advice on which skill sets should students focus on while they're still in the student life?
So I can really just speak to my personal experience here and maybe use that as an example. You know, when I started at Hopkins, I had one goal, and it was like, I just want to get my master's degree. I want to learn more about study design, period. And every class I took, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to become an expert in international health. And then it would be, the next one would be like, policy is so cool. You know, it was like this constant sort of like mental reframing of the power of this degree. And when I left, I think I took a lot of that with me in terms of thinking about, yeah, I work in pharma, or I work in biotech, or I work in consulting, but you've really got to have a very broad vision of healthcare. It's not just about drug development, it's about the healthcare industry. And it's about how we deliver healthcare, how we use healthcare, what healthcare costs, what motivates people, and public health in that framework that Hopkins is giving you right now. Maybe you're graduating with a degree in international health, or maybe you're graduating with a degree in policy. Don't be so aligned with that if you're trying to get into pharma, because maybe the opening that's going to come to you will be an entry-level position in regulatory affairs. And you'll get in, and what you'll realize is that the training you've had through the MPH program is, in this framework of public health, is so applicable to the pharmaceutical industry. So I would say, don't stick yourself in thinking like, I have a degree in international health, or I have a degree in epidemiology. When I took the MPH in Epi, I was really interested in data and how we're going to use data for not just stuff we generate from clinical trials, but like database analyses and creating economic models and well, not economic models, but I was thinking more about like natural history of disease. I was very interested in that. How can we learn from like EHR and claims data sets, like how, and I was a natural evolution into, health economics. I would have never gone to my MPH degree thinking, I really want to focus on health economics. It just happened. And it was like I had those skills and you could pivot those skills and do something else with them. So just be open to those opportunities.
Right. So it's interesting, like you don't even have to take a class in health economics to get into health economics, right?
No.
As long as you
No.
have the skills, right? Okay.
No, you don't.
Okay. Thank you, Marcy. Hugo, do you want to add on to that? Like what RA work you took that led to your that led to you being in Pfizer today, or how has that helped you today in any which ways?
Sure. Yeah, I think for my field, like you do have to have like technical skill sets that are required for positions. But I would say like you need technical positions to get into the company for specific roles. But if you're interested in developing into a leadership position, which I think I would imagine many people are, you really do need to get a sense of like the bigger picture of context, of strategy, these kinds of things. It would certainly help. I mean, I think especially my postdoc at Hopkins, I think that was really helpful because like we had to collaborate with a whole bunch of different organizations like academic, nonprofit, et cetera. And one of the big lessons that I had learned from my postdoc mentor is like, if you don't know how to play well with people, then no one's going to want to play with you. And so I think that to me is like one of the big lessons about soft skills. Like you can be the best pipetter of one liquid into another liquid. But if you don't know how to lead a team, if you don't know how to get along with adjacent teams, if you don't understand how to align multiple teams to work together, get people as stakeholders on your team, like there is a synergy that you can build with soft skills that helps a team move much further than they can as separate ones. And so to me, I would say like, to contextualize your question a little bit, like, yes, you need some technical skills to get you into the technical roles, but for leadership positions, you really do want to start developing some of those soft skills. And that, you kind of have to step outside, I think, of the classroom to start doing that. So I think I would say, if you can find opportunities where you can see that. I was really lucky at Hopkins because like I knew a whole bunch of different students in epi, HPM, like currently in regulatory, currently in legal affairs, like just having conversations with them, like that gives me, an intrinsic scope of all the things. Like I certainly would have no idea of the crisis of Medicare and Medicaid without knowing someone who was at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid. Like these kinds of like larger contexts, I think are really helpful in learning, your role, especially in pharma, as part of a larger network. And I think that'll help separate you from like the pack, like if you want to go into a leadership position.
It's interesting, Hugo. Also, I feel that you're at Hopkins when you, some of us, they don't really like to work into group projects, but then it could be seen as an opportunity to develop these team management skills or, team leadership skills, right? So I think they should also look at that as that opportunity and just not crib about the fact that some people don't like to work in the groups, right? So I think I like the way how you're phrasing it, like each thing you do here, that nothing goes to waste, right?
That's an excellent point. Like as a criminally introverted person, like I found group activities to be very difficult for me. But I think, as I started growing and as I took like leadership classes, like that's a very good point. Like I took those as opportunities to see, okay, this is the group dynamic. I can fit here as like the coach. I can fit here as one of the foot soldiers. Like if you learn like if you can learn that skill of figuring out where you can exercise your skills best, that is an excellent skill to have, because sometimes you shouldn't be the leader. Sometimes you should be the foot soldier. Sometimes you need to be the operations person. And I think this speaks to, I think, Joanna and Marcy's point about like, wearing multiple hats. I think wearing multiple hats is really great because you learn a lot, but it gives you a whole bunch of skills, but it also gives you a bunch of context. so you understand what's important for the rest of the members of your team. And so you can have those conversations with them and you can motivate them to help work with you.
Right. Thank you, Hugo. Joanna, the same question to you. Like, how would you recommend someone who wants to get into regulatories? What skills should they have, and how would you advise for them to stay updated in terms of regulations? Because there are so many different rules and laws and that's coming up, and it's really difficult to stay on track with all of them. So, do you have any suggestion for that?
Sure. So, speaking about, I think, roles in pharma in general, Hugo, I 100% agree with what you said. I think soft skills, I think being able to do that interaction with teams with different people is critical to being in a business in private industry, but you could say other industry too, but in private industry, definitely, because you have teams of people who are not like you. They don't have your expertise, and you have to be able to work with them, because if you can't, you will not be effective, right? Part of that is communication. You have the technical knowledge. Can you communicate it in a way so that people who do not have that technical knowledge can understand what you're saying and want to hear what you're saying and to work with that, right? If what you're saying sounds like it's a foreign language and you aren't able to translate it for them, it's not going to help them, and they're not going to seek you as a resource, and that's going to limit your effectiveness in the organization, right? That goes to, research roles. It goes to legal roles, frankly. If I speak only in legalese, I get cut out very quickly of conversations, because people are like, I don't know what you're saying, and I don't want to do that then, right? I don't see how you're furthering the objective of the team and helping us to move the ball. So I think soft skills communication is critical when you're working with people who are not of the same kind of background as you, right? But that's also one of the fantastic things about working in teams like that and environments like that, because you learn from them. You learn the context, you pick up technical knowledge from them, you just kind of have a bigger picture of what's happening. And frankly, that's something that you can start doing at Hopkins too, right? Don't just hang out with people who are the same kind of physician as you, or who are pharmacists like you. Like, there were law students like me who were walking around who you could talk to, right? We were very popular when you had to take the public health and the law class, but outside of that, people were kind of like, yeah, you're just there, right? So many friends, and that first case got thrown down in that book. But aside from that, right, you can learn about that. You can learn about context. You can learn about different issues, what people are interested in, how they view it, because all of those little strings are going to help you build that context that will help you be extremely successful in your role. Because if you're just in that little narrow field, right, there's this Chinese proverb basically, and it's that you're the frog at the bottom of the well. And if you look up, all you see is that circle, that's the top of the well, and you think that's the entire sky, right? But there's like all this other sky out of it, right? You need to like be able to realize that maybe what you're viewing is pretty narrow or very specific. So I think learning from different people, listening to their stories, their perspectives, is very helpful. And I think Hopkins is unique in that everybody's kind of in this public health space, right? We are related to it in one way or another, but from all these different walks of life. And that's something that is very, very interesting and fun to have when you're talking to people and kind of hearing what they're saying.
Thank you, Joanna. I think that's one of the reasons we are gathered here today, like listening to your perspectives and how they can change our narrative. So it's really a good opportunity. So having talked about skills and how one gets into pharma, I was wondering if you can talk about what challenges that you come across. And sometimes I believe that when you're making a decision about ensuring that all the regulations are met in your company and the research that is being conducted is of the highest qualities, what challenges do you come across, and what external factors affect your decision-making capacity, and how you try to avoid being influenced by those? The reason I ask this is, like, if we are to ever come across such situations, how would we be able to manage it, or how can we handle that? Marcy, do you want to take the lead on that?
Sure, I can. So I think one of the hardest lessons that you learn is there's no perfect decision. It's one of the, I think, as people that are scientifically minded, you're constantly looking for this truth, and you're trying to decrease the amount of variability in your decision, or, have you considered every possible covariate or interaction that could influence it? You think about it in these ways, right? It's so much more nuanced than that. And I think, you know, from my perspective in the role that I have, every day I have to make decisions, and it's always framed around the patient, right? And a lot of people don't understand that about pharma. And, you know, they think that it's just this machine, we crank out the experiments, we file a bunch of stuff with the FDA, and then we get an approval. That's really not how any of it happens, right, Hugo? You're laughing. So we're very patient-centric. And so understanding what the patient needs and what they value, and is this going to actually bring something to them? You have to make decisions and trade-offs. And that's really hard. And I don't think people appreciate that. You know, and I think that that's a really challenging thing if you're going to get into this industry is I always tell people, like even people on my team, you know, you work with these cross-functional teams, you work with people that are working with market access, or they're working in a regulatory capacity, or they're working at the clinical sites with the physicians, or they're legal, or they're people that are working on labeling or phase 4 commitments or pharmacovigilance. And we all have to make decisions about the next steps that a program is going to take, or a process that we're going to move through. Every dollar or unit of energy that we spend on a program that has a very low probability of success is not just 1 unit of energy or a dollar. It's actually a dollar or a unit of energy you're taking away from something else that can bring value to patients and to healthcare systems and caregivers and people that we know and love. Every dollar or unit of energy you're spending on something that's not, it has a low probability of success, is also a little bit of hope that you're giving to a patient population. And I feel very strongly that, you know, we involve patient advocacy groups, we do all this stuff. It's decision-making is really hard in pharma. And you need to be prepared that some of those assets or those programs that you are so in love with, sometimes the best thing to do is to stop. I don't know, Hugo and Joanne, to me, that was the hardest lesson and the hardest thing I have to do every day.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So like, I feel like my experience is probably not representative, only because like I jumped in right as COVID hit and we had to make the COVID vaccine. But I would say like, I can't agree more, I think, with what Marcy's saying, like, excuse me. So like everything we do is, we know that this is a thing that is going to involve injecting into a human being. And so we know that this, like what we have to do is of the utmost importance, and it has to be something that is going to be beneficial for people. When it require, and like, I think something to hint at, I think you were hinting at this in your question, like, we want the science to be the most robust, because we are dedicated to try to get material that will improve public health, people's lives, especially in the context of COVID. And like, we want to build in the most rigorous experiments, and I mean, I am happy that we have like multiple regions of oversight. I would say, to speak specifically to your question, like what's the hardest thing? The hardest thing speaks back to actually to your previous question, which is learning how to work with a whole bunch of people who have a whole bunch of different responsibilities. Like, certainly there are scientific things. Like I was on meetings, I was on like Saturday 8 a.m. meetings with the logistics crew about like what kind of what plastic bottle has to be shipped over to whatever. And I was like, oh my God, who cares? It's like, what does it matter? But I understand, like, this is a concern for the operations and logistics crew. And those are things that I need to understand in how I do my work. I think, speaking to Joanne's point, like, I am intimately tied in to the work that we have with our IP attorneys, because like, we need to figure out what the IP space is for the work that we do, and how to deal with the fact that we have a whole bunch of competitors. And so like, I have to understand that I'm talking to an attorney who does not have a PhD in molecular microbiology. And the attorney has to realize that I don't have a degree in law, and I can't even speak intelligently about it. But like, the two of us, like, we have to come to a common ground, because we both need to understand like, what are the drivers that drive what's important for the two of us. So I have to understand like what's important for the formulation team, for the analytical team, for the legal team, for the logistics team. And I think understanding that bigger picture, that was the biggest difficulty for me as someone from academia, because in academia, in my little PhD lab, I can do all the experiments. I'm everything. I can do the production, I can do analytical development, I can do delivery, I can do readouts. But here there are whole bunches of different teams, and there's a whole bunch of oversight that's involved. So understanding that, that phrase, being a cog in a machine is typically used as a derogatory sense, but what you need to understand is like, if you want to move mountains, you're going to need a big machine. And so it helps for you to understand the roles and the responsibilities of everyone around you. Because if you're in a situation, you say, I don't understand legal, like why are they concerned about this? It doesn't make any sense. It's arrogant for you to think that. Like go find the attorney and say, hey, I don't understand the context here. Can you explain it to me? Because unfortunately, all I know how to do is move one piece of salty water to another piece of salty water. Can you give me the context that's driving what's important to you? So to me, like that was the biggest lesson to learn, because as an academic scientist, everything is in your purview. But once you go into pharma, like you're very siloed in what your purview is, but you have to acknowledge that you're part of a much larger instrument to wield very powerful public good. And you have to understand that like not everyone has the exact same alignment as you do. And I find getting those soft skills to understand that that was my biggest hurdle.
Thank you, Hugo. That was really a very comprehensive perspective, and it was interesting to know. Joanna, do you have anything to add onto what was not already said?
I think it's pretty similar to what Marcy and Hugo said already, right? I think in making hard decisions, I think the key is to respect everybody's expertise, because you're all working for the same goal. You're all working to help patients and to get something to help patients, right? You're all in the same, we're all in the same boat here, right? Might as well row together. And so in doing that, part of it is understanding that everybody brings their piece and their knowledge to it, and to respect that knowledge, right? If you don't understand, ask questions, because that information is going to help you make a better decision. And Marcy, I 100% agree with you. Like it's very rare that you have the perfect decision, right, that you can make. There's so many considerations that are involved and so many teams involved, but everybody's there because there's a specific aspect of the business that they're taking care of, that they're custodians of. And so you have to understand that yours may not necessarily be more important than that one, which is probably a weird thing coming from a lawyer, but it's true, right? Like we're all, you guys laughing. I probably tangled with lawyers more than once, right? Marcy, you as well. But no, it's like we're all in it together. So we all just have to figure out how to make it work and come to the decision that is best, for the goal.
Thank you, Joanna. So I cannot believe that we are almost nearing towards our discussion. It just feels like we just got started. But I was wondering if you guys have any opportunities for our students now that they can look into, and where they could provide any information. I mean, if you're comfortable sharing that.
I mean, I have two positions I'm looking for right now, bachelor's and master's degrees in bench sciences. I'm eventually going to be looking for hopefully another 2 if my boss accepts that requisition. I think if you want to look for jobs at Pfizer, it's reasonably easy to Google. I think something workday.pfizer.com might be the fastest way to get there. Certainly, and to the question that was raised before, email me to say, hey, Hugo, I was at this seminar. I think I'd be a good candidate. Let me know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hugo. We have 10 minutes left. Are there any questions in the audience that you'd like to ask?
Can I pop in really quickly about jobs? So Pharma has a LinkedIn page. It's PHRMA, Pharma. And on that LinkedIn page, there's a jobs tab for pharma jobs, but also under the life tab, there's an industry talent resume portal that you can look at. So that is a way that you can submit your resumes for, there's R&D and marketing, there's legal and technology, there's accounting and other. So you can take a look there and kind of see that's how you can directly submit, resumes into that portal. But also LinkedIn is a resource that a lot of companies and recruiters are using now. Take a look there and search, because there's a huge range of things that are posted on there.
Thank you, Joanna. Rupiksha, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm still a first-year master's student. So my question is, what resources should I be looking into, or what is a way to get an internship in such a position, or get a feel of the company and to understand whether I'd be a good fit for the industry? And more than that, I'm quite sure that I would like to work in the pharma industry, but then where exactly I would be a good fit?
Thank you for your question, Rupiksha. Do you have any suggestions on that?
So as a former Hopkins person who looked for a job, I really liked that pharma network that existed, where there were people who were committed to helping Hopkins students talk to industry professionals. I think that gets to the larger point. You should have an informational interview with someone who's in a department or field that you're interested in. I've done it to previous students, not necessarily just at Hopkins, but you should have, like, I would say, have that conversation. Like, if you're interested in doing something in legal affairs or project management, or God forbid, bench science, go find someone who's probably at a level that maybe is a little bit higher than you, or that would have the time, have the context to be able to give you a good conversation about that. I would also say, like, when you come to that conversation, make sure you've thought through what you're interested in. It is the most helpful if you come in with a bunch of questions, because I've had a couple of calls where people call and say, what's it like? And I give my spiel, and then the conversation ends. And so, like, I don't feel like I've helped them enough, but I think that I could have helped them more if they had more points of contact, if they had questions like, what are your day-to-day? What's your promotional trajectory? What are your paths of growth? What are your professional development opportunities? That kind of stuff. So I would say, like, my advice would be find these people and make sure you come in with a bunch of, like, well thought out questions, because that's, to me, the best way to get a sense. Like, for an example, even while I was at Pfizer, like, I was questioning whether or not I wanted to go into project management. So I sought out someone who was in project management. And then I had a couple of hour-long sessions with them. They were very generous with their time. I found out I didn't want to go into project management at all, but it was really helpful because it was coming in, like, I knew what I wanted to do professionally. And I asked a whole bunch of pointed questions to kind of tease out exactly what their day-to-day and their, like, long-term objectives are. And I found out that's not what I wanted to do. And this is going to happen, but it's going to be the most helpful for you to come in with those really pointed and well thought out questions. Because, it's the job that you want. So you're going to need to figure out what are the questions that are important to you.
I would add two things to what you said, Hugo, that I've been kind of thinking about during this conversation. One is that when I was at Hopkins, and I don't mean this to be, but I did feel very separate from the rest of the cohort because I was in pharma. And there were a couple of us there who kind of bonded together, and and I know for a fact that someone I work with now was in the PhD program there when I was as well, and she was doing it part-time. She's working for another company. I think there's probably pharma people among you. So find out who the pharma part-timers are amongst you, because that may be an amazing resource for you. They may be able to connect you. They may be able to share their experience with you. They're going to want to do that. They really want to do that because they're at Hopkins for a reason. And it's the same reason you went there. If you have a non-pharma background. The other thing I'd add is, we tend, as the pharmaceutical industry, We go to scientific meetings. We're not going to the same meetings that you would go to for, public health initiatives, right? We're going to ASCO, and we're going to ICAC, and we're going to IMS, and we're going to all these very, very therapeutic area aligned scientific conferences. As students, you can probably get entry into those for next to nothing for student memberships. Just sign up, even if you're not into cancer, and go and work the exhibit hall, because all those people there standing in front of the pharma exhibits, they love to talk about what they do. Go talk to them. Just say, what do you do? Tell me about this. I'm interested in pharma. Every time it's a great way to expand that network.
Thank you, Marcy. That's a great suggestion. And you mentioned about this portal at Hopkins. Were you talking about Handshake?
Maybe it's been a while and my memory is awful, but that sounds familiar.
Okay, because there's another portal called Handshake now, which also helps connect students to alums. Maybe
Sure.
we can look into that.
Yes, I want to also build on, I think, what Marcy said, like very specific to my field also. Like we have an annual meeting called, I forget the title, but it's for mRNA vaccine development. Like that's very technical, but that means all of my people are going to be there. So like certainly for my field, like you have ASV and ASM, like those scientific societies, and those are really great. But for stuff that's, I think to Marcy's point, for stuff that's more therapeutically oriented, like those conferences are going to be where we are more of.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. And Marcy, there has been a couple of questions about those seminars and conferences that you mentioned. Could you quite label a few, or maybe let us know where we could find those information?
Sure. Maybe we can all send you kind of our therapeutic area relevant scientific conferences. Sure.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. There's just a few minutes left, and I wanted to change gears a little bit. We spend a lot of time talking about how to get into pharma industry, and I was wondering if we can talk a little bit about why would one want to get into a pharma industry, right? Especially when someone comes from a public health sector, they feel that there is a lack of transparency between pharma and the public health, and they look at it more as maybe a profit for organization. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on how your perspective or how your narrative changed when you took a degree in public health and went into pharma sector. Joanna, do you want to start on that? Maybe just like a few lines there, because we are running short of time, but I just wanted to take your saying on that.
Sure. I'm happy to take a stab at it, and then Marcy, Hugh, if you guys want to as well from your perspective. So I think that even thinking about the difference between drawing that mental line between pharma and public health it's a false delineation, because arguably, I mean, not even arguably, what we are working towards is also supporting the public health, right? I mean, vaccines, treatments, where do those come from, right? It's from the innovation, it's from the work of researchers in these companies, developing it, pushing it towards having all those approvals, and then distributing it and finding the ways to distribute them in a way where they maintain their safety and efficacy, right? That is public health. And so I think thinking about it as different and kind of being this nefarious other shade that's unrelated to it is you're limiting yourself in thinking about it that way, because in the end, these companies are working to help patients. That's the whole point. No one cares if you have a treatment or cure if a patient doesn't get it. And no one cares if you make a product and no patient wants to use it, right? So that's the thing. The whole end goal is to have this, giving it to patients and improving their health and saving their lives sometimes. So I don't view it as that difference between public health and the pharmaceutical industry. It's all kind of part of this bigger goal.
Yeah, I want to add, I think Marcy and Joanne probably brought this up, like the line between the lines we draw between academia and industry that I've seen when I was on the academia side, like that doesn't really exist. Like now when I'm in industry, like I think to Joanne's point, like we take care of not the last mile, but like the mile before the last mile, because you have what is discovered in academia, you have patient need, and you need to bridge that gap. And the mechanism by which to bridge that gap is the pharmaceutical industry. And like, to that question about ethics and things, like, we are the hardest on our own data. Like, because we know, like, we want this thing to be a good thing. And so for us, like, when we do multiple controls, like we do batch controls, when we have multiple sites where we have to say, how come your yield was 10% lower than our yield? Like, these are the things that we agonize about. So I think like this, yeah, I think to Joanne's point, like, there is this myth of like the nefarious pharmaceutical industry, but like, we're in the same boat. Like, we are all in, certainly for me, like, we're in the business of public health. And yes, the economics may be different, but the goals are the same. The rigor is the same. I would even argue the rigor is probably more stringent because we have to these are stuff we're not putting into mice and monkeys. These are stuff we're putting into people. So we have to be more stringent. And I'll hand it off to Marcy.
I would concur. There's really nothing that governs. There's nothing different that has changed. It's just operating in a different forum to achieve different health goals, but nothing has changed. If anything, I think, to Hugo's point, this awareness of the fortunate place that I'm in to potentially impact many, many people with the resources that I have and the scientific acumen that is kind of at my disposal, because I'm in pharma and I work with all of these amazing people that are driven to bring solutions to patients. Nothing has changed. It has only been enhanced by my awareness of the importance of what I do every day. So, and I agree. I think we're so strict on ourselves. It's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Hugo, and thank you, Joanne, for this interesting conversation. So we are on time, and I just want to summarize our conversation in a bit. So we talked about how to get into a pharma industry, and people need to start networking, build their own networks, reach out to people, and talk about their own interest. Use keywords and job description in their own resume, so it helps pass through the screening stage. Maybe look up into the biotech companies in order to get into the pharma sector for those who are international here. Then keep your horizon broaden. Our panelists also had to send in multiple applications before they could get a position. So we're all in this together. Like Joanna said, we are in the same boat. Just keep stirring, and that sum it up. And also on the last point, that pharma and public sector are really intangible. They're just one, and we don't have to look at it from as different. So yeah, thank you for all those who attended today, and thank you to our three panelists for giving us this time. We had a great discussion.